Hello viewers, welcome to this discussion where we are going to review, comment and analyze the judgment of the Cambria Africa versus Breastplate Services case. It's a judgment recently given in the High Court of Mutare. My name is Brighton Zoke, and with me here on the panel list is, to my immediate left, Mr. Tinotenda Zobo, Miss Elisa Mageza, and to my immediate right, Mr. Lavit Muringwa and Mr. Isom Loan. So to break the ice, I'll start by asking Mr. Muringwa to give us the facts of the case.
The brief facts of the matter are that the plaintiff and the defendant entered into an agreement of sale where the plaintiff sold its entire share capital in Nelcom Zambia Limited to the defendant for a price of 46,347, and it was supposed to have been paid by the end of March 2016. However, the defendant could not complete its obligations and pay up, hence it reneged on its obligations and breached the contract. After breaching the contract, the plaintiff took the matter to the courts. However, it was overtaken by events in which statutory instruments 33 and statutory instrument number 142 of 2019 were issued before the matter was determined before the court. And these had effect of altering the commercial transactions that had been entered into contractually by the parties. So the matter was brought up for trial, and before the matter was determined, there was a pre-trial conference in which the party agreed on most of the sticking points. However, the legal issue that remained was the issue whether the outstanding obligations could be paid in the United States dollars or not. So with regards to the statutory instrument number 33 and the statutory instrument number 142 of 2019, the defendant argued that they brought about a supervening impossibility on his part, said that if the judgment was going to be issued in favor of the plaintiff, it was going to be a brutal fulminant, and the execution of that judgment would not be fully executed, as it was a judgment which was sounding in the United States dollar, as it was nominated in the United States dollar. Therefore, the statutory instruments had barred the transaction of any amount in foreign currency. So the court had to determine on that legal issue. It basically had to rely on the previous judgments that were issued in the case of Makwindi, oil procurement versus the National Oil Company, and also in foreign judgment in Malingos versus George Frank, a United States case, where the judgment briefly was that the law is a living system where necessity dictates what should be just. So in this case, what was just was that the plaintiff could not be held or could not be prejudiced by the devaluation of any currency. So it will be sound in that case to give a judgment sounding in foreign currency, as well as the fact that the court also noted, particularly in this case where Justice Muzenda noted that the court cannot make an agreement for the parties. Therefore, the pacta servante principle was upheld, and also was upheld, and it also goes on to strengthen the sanctity of the contract. So in a nutshell, the court ruled that by looking at the surrounding circumstances of the case, it couldn't rule that what was implied from the surrounding circumstances was that all the parties were quite agreeable. What they wanted to enforce, or what they wanted to come out from their agreement, was the fact that the amount should be paid in United States dollars, and also the fact that twice prior to the case coming to the court, the defendant had been issued with an IBAN and a SWIFT code. So all those were pointers that the amount should be paid in foreign currency. Thus, they upheld the Pacta Savante.
Thank you for the facts of the case, Mr. Muringwa. Right now, we can proceed by asking Mr. Zobo to tell us the legal issues pertaining the case in hand.
Thank you, counsel. Thank you, fellow counsels. I'll talk about the issues for determination in this particular case. At the pre-trial conference, the issues for determination, the first issue for determination at the pre-trial conference was whether or not the defendant is liable to pay the outstanding balance in US dollars. The second question was that whether or not the defendant is liable to pay the attorney-client costs at the attorney-client scale. Also, the third one was that the defendant was liable, whether or not the defendant was liable to pay interest. And also, but it has to be taken into consideration that at the time that the case proceeded to the trial, the issues for determination had been narrowed down to one issue. And the main issue for determination at the trial was whether or not the defendant is liable to pay the outstanding balance in US dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Zobo. As we proceed with our discussion, I would like to ask Ms. Mageza to tell us your opinion pertaining to the judgment of the case.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Zonke. I am also of the view that the judgment made was fair, as it was in line with the principles of justice. It is imperative to note that the company, the plaintiff, was a foreign company selling a foreign asset to a local company. Therefore, it cannot be sustained that the purchase price be made in a local currency. And also, the court took into consideration that the parties had contractual obligations, whereby the defendant was supposed to pay the plaintiff in United States dollars. That was paid.
Thank you for your submissions, Mr. Zobo. Just as we continue with our discussion, I would like to ask you, Mr. Mulowani, to tell us about the implications of Statutory Instrument 142 of 2019 in relation with our contracts and commercial transactions in Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Bright. Statutory Instrument 142 of 2019 was brought about by the Zimbabwe Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe regulations. This was issued in terms of Section 64, as read with Section 441 of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe Act. What simple meant, or the coming in of this statutory instrument, it effectively ended the use of multi-currency. This would mean that any transaction after the effective date is now in either RTGS, bond note, or bond coin, so no foreign currency. Then now, what does it mean now to contracts that were there before? And then from the case at hand, the Cambria case, with the decision, you find out that the courts will uphold some agreements looking at the terms, the principles of sanctity of contracts, privity of contracts, like you have seen in this case. It was a foreign company. Also, the use of the US dollar on payment was something that was agreed upon by the parties. So looking at the justice of the case, there was going to be prejudice if the payment was going to be done in RTGS. And then looking also at contracts that are going to come after, or that are coming after, it means that it is illegal now to contract using US dollar or any foreign currency. So all contracts now, it means that they will be in local currency. And then for those contracts that were there before, it will be, the courts will have to weigh if the issues in court. But however, if the parties agreed and they are making their payments, it will mean that they will continue using the currency that they agreed upon prior to the effective date. You find out that looking at some of the cases, even the English case of Maliangos versus George Frank Services or Limited, the issue there was looking at the justice of the case. So the courts will look at any prejudice, look at the terms of the contract, and even some cases referred to in the case, like Zimbabwe Development Bank against versus Zambezi Safaris Lodges and others. The agreement was that the bank had forwarded a loan to the companies, a number of them tourist companies and hotels. It was an agreement of up to $1 million. And then some monies were withdrawn, being in US dollars, and some in rands, and also Zimbabwean dollars. But some settlements were done, but before the conclusion of the payment, the defendants wanted to pay using RTGS or using bond notes or local currency. And the balance payment, which was almost 40 million, that was the local currency that was going to clear to clear the debt. But however, the plaintiffs refused, and they had even to take the matter to court so that the payment will be made in US dollars. The court, as you look at the decision of the court, they took into consideration that for the bank to forward the loan, it had also sought a loan from a bank outside Zimbabwe, and also to advance the tourism industry. So it was also the court's understanding that the bank, Zimbabwe Development Bank, was supposed also to repay the foreign debt, and it could not pay after being given the RT or the bond or the local currency. It could no longer be able to pay back that same amount that it had borrowed, for them to borrow further to these defendants. So the judgment was that they had to pay, the defendants were to pay using foreign currency according to the agreement. So you find out that the terms of a contract, they are considered. And so for any future transaction, however, for Zimbabwe, we also look at, you understand that there is a statutory instrument 213 of the exchange control regulations that came into force recently. You find that it's complementing the other statutory instruments, that is statutory instrument 33 and also statutory instrument 142. In that it also bans any use or contracting in using foreign currency. So any transaction now, whether even advertising or even making quotations on using foreign currency, is now illegal. In a brief, I can say, right, this is some of the implications.
Okay, maybe what he's trying to put across is it promoted and established and determined the RTGS as the complementing the bond note as well as the bond coin, and also determining it as a sole legal tender in Zimbabwe, and it augmented statutory instrument 33 of 2009, which issued the RTGS as a currency.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for your submission. Thank you so much, Ms. Mageza. I would like to hand over to Mr. Muringwa to hear his opinion on the judgment of the case. And after he's done, you can also hand over to Mr. Mlowani to also comment on the judgment of the case.
Thank you very much, sir. I would like to concur with my two other colleagues who have given their opinion that the judgment by Justice Zenda was quite firm and quite fair in circumstances. I think personally that he came from a position where he upheld the pacta sunt servanda principle, and the sanctity of the contract is very important, since the court cannot impose its own view or on what has not been agreed by the parties. That is very important to uphold the sanctity of the contract. And also the very fact that the amount was denominated in the United States dollar or foreign currency is very important. In terms of justice, you cannot therefore push the parties to agree, or even the plaintiff to agree to be given an amount that has been devalued, as you are quite aware that the RTGS immediately devalued after this issuance of the RTGS dollar. So in all fairness to the plaintiff, I think it was a very sound judgment. It is very supported. It is supported with local and international cases. So in terms of precedence, the court did well to support its order by such law. I think maybe Mr. Mluan, you can take over.
Yes, maybe just to add a few things on the judgment. You find out that this was a foreign company, that is a British company, but registered in Zimbabwe, yes. Dealing with who were plaintiffs, dealing with a local company, who are the defendants. And the defense relied much on section 4D, that is of statutory instrument 33. And you find that it talks about liabilities, assets and liabilities that they be valued in RTGS. But however, when coming up with the judgment, the judge relied much on section 2D of the same statutory instrument, which talks about foreign debts and loans that they should be payable in foreign currency. So in such, from the law or the legal point of view, you find out that legally it was actually correct to say that the defendants pay in foreign currency. I think that would be that.
Maybe just to add on to what Mr. Mlingo was saying, I think it is of paramount importance to note that the court mainly emphasized on the issue of the sanctity of contract, which is one of the major core issues in the law of contract. I think the court was not trying to create another contract, but rather they were trying to uphold the terms and the terms in the contract that had been agreed by the parties. And I think therefore the judgment, just like what everyone has said, is quite fair and just, taking into consideration that the court was only trying to uphold the sanctity of the contract, the actual agreement between...
Thank you so much, Counsel, for your wonderful time. We had an interesting discussion indeed. I think this marks the end of our discussion. Thank you so much.